Hello, friends. Welcome to Soft History Stories. Have you wondered what medieval peasants really ate to survive brutal winters? Imagine stepping into a medieval village where the world is wrapped in a thick blanket of snow, and every step you take crunches through the frozen earth beneath your boots. The wind is sharp and cuts through the air, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the chimneys of small, humble cottages that dot the landscape. It's the middle of winter, and life here is anything but easy. The village is quiet, save for the occasional sound of a dog barking or the distant clink of a hammer in a nearby forge. The cold, bitter air bites at your skin as you make your way through the narrow, icy streets. The houses are small, their roofs sloping steeply under the weight of the snow. They huddle close together, creating a tight-knit community where survival is deeply dependent on each other. These cottages, with their stone walls and thatched roofs, are nothing like the insulated homes we know today. They offer little protection from the outside chill, and every room is filled with the constant struggle to keep warm. As you look around, you realize that the village's survival depends heavily on what was harvested months ago. The food stored in cellars, the grains in the lofts, the salted meats hung in the kitchens. These are the resources that will carry the villagers through the harshest months of the year. It's a test of endurance for both body and spirit as the long, cold days stretch on. For the peasants here, every meal is a victory. Every fire stoked a small triumph over the relentless winter. Food is not just sustenance, but a lifeline, and without it, survival becomes uncertain. The hard work of the harvest now plays its role in keeping the village alive. But it's not just about food. It's about a collective will to endure. The people of this village know that their survival is tied to the survival of their neighbors. There's a sense of solidarity here, an unspoken bond that ties everyone together through the long, cruel winter. They share what little they have, help each other in times of need, and most importantly, support each other emotionally through the cold, often bleak days. This winter, like all winters, will be a test of resilience, a harsh reminder of how fragile life can be, and yet how strong people can be when they have no choice but to endure. This village, with all its dangers and hardships, thrives on a spirit of survival. It's a simple yet profound existence, where every day is a struggle to stay warm, stay fed, and stay alive. When you think about it, it's hard to imagine how different this world is from the one we live in today. In our modern world, we're fortunate enough to have central heating, warm clothing, and food at our fingertips. We can easily go to the store and pick up whatever we need, whenever we need it, and our homes are filled with comforts that protect us from the cold. But here, in this medieval village, life is precarious. Every winter is a fight for survival, and every meal is a blessing that comes with sacrifice. In tonight's story, we'll dive deeper into the realities of this medieval life, where food scarcity, cold, and the constant threat of illness create an environment where survival is not guaranteed. The people here must rely on their resilience, resourcefulness, and community spirit to make it through this season. Before we dive into the story, take a moment to find a cozy spot and relax. Close your eyes, take a slow breath, and let your body sink into whatever you're lying on. Let the story unfold, and imagine yourself in this world of hardship and survival. If you're enjoying the journey so far, don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love to hear where you're tuning in from. Now, let's continue and take a closer look at the life of a peasant village surviving the harsh winter. The village is eerily quiet, the snow covering the ground like a heavy blanket, muffling every sound, making even the usual bustle of the morning seem distant and far away. Yet, there is one thing you know for certain. You are alive because of bread. As you step into the cold, damp air, feeling the crunch of frozen earth beneath your boots, you reflect on the quiet strength of this humble food. It's not just nourishment, it's the very reason your people survive these brutal winters. It is bread, made from rye, barley, or oats, that fills your belly each day, giving you the energy to rise and continue with the endless work of surviving in a world that often seems more hostile than kind. Bread is the one constant in a life that is marked by seasons of uncertainty. It is the food that carries you through the lean winter months when little else is available. You are not the only one in the village relying on it, of course. The entire community depends on this simple loaf of bread for survival. Its significance cannot be overstated. It is the cornerstone of your diet, the foundation of your sustenance. While the wealthy may dine on meat, fresh vegetables, and a variety of grains, you and the others in the village rely on bread to fill your stomachs and keep you from hunger. But even here, within the confines of your simple existence, bread is more than just food. It is a marker of status, a reminder of the class divides that separate you from the wealthier folk who live in the larger houses on the other side of the village. As you begin your day, the first thing on your mind is the bread. Is there enough left from the previous day's baking? Did the harvest provide enough grain for another loaf? Or will the community be scraping by again? These questions are more than just idle thoughts. They are critical to survival. For you, bread is not a choice. It is a necessity. Whether it is the dark, dense rye bread you make with what little you have, or the coarser barley bread you eat when the wheat is running low, it is what keeps you going. It is both your sustenance and your survival. The loaves you bake are the physical embodiment of your endurance. They are the product of your hard work, the fruit of your labor, and the only thing standing between you and the cold emptiness of hunger. In the harsh, unrelenting winters of the village, bread is the food that sustains you and your family. Rye is the most common grain, a hardy plant that grows even in poor soil and can withstand the frost that seems to linger in the air for months. Barley is another popular choice, another tough grain that provides energy and calories to get through the day. But the bread made from these grains is heavy and dense, much more filling than the airy white bread that the wealthier villagers enjoy. They are lucky enough to have access to wheat bread, light and soft, a treat in comparison to the coarse, filling rye bread you eat. Wheat bread symbolizes wealth and abundance, something only those with the means to afford it can enjoy. For the peasants, rye and barley are the grains that keep the fires burning, that keep the children fed, and the adults strong enough to continue their daily labor. Bread is not just sustenance, it is a symbol of survival. To live without it is to risk death. The wealthy may have their luxuries, meats, wines, and fine fruits, but without bread, the peasant would not survive. You may have fewer choices than the nobility, fewer comforts, but you have what matters most: bread. This is the food of your people. The bread you make may not be soft or refined, but it is filling, and it gives you the strength to carry on. For the wealthier villagers, bread can also be a symbol of status. Wheat bread, soft and delicate, is reserved for those who can afford it. The more affluent households can purchase fine wheat flour, and in their homes, bread is an elegant part of the daily meal. To eat wheat bread is to display wealth, to show that you can afford the finer things in life. It is a symbol of abundance, and those who partake in it are distinguished by their social status. For you, however, it is rye and barley that serve as the mainstay of your diet, and while it may not be as glamorous, it is more than enough to keep you going. You will never know the softness of wheat bread, but in your world, it is not needed. Rye bread will do the job. It will fill your stomach, it will nourish you, and it will ensure your survival for another day. But bread, like so many things in your life, is not just a commodity. It holds a deeper meaning, one that transcends the simple act of eating. For you and the villagers, bread is tied to community. It is something that is shared, something that connects you to the others in the village. In times of scarcity, It is the willingness to share bread that binds the community together. In the small, humble homes where the peasants live, sharing bread is an act of solidarity. You and your neighbors may have little, but you share what you have, even if it's only a loaf of rye bread. Bread is the bond that keeps you all connected. It is a reminder that no matter how hard the winters are, you are not alone in your struggle. The bread you share is a symbol of mutual dependence, a gesture of generosity that keeps you all alive. Bread also plays a role in the rituals and ceremonies that punctuate life in the village. In the church, bread takes on a symbolic meaning. During the seasonal feasts and religious celebrations, bread becomes a central part of the rituals. It is blessed by the priest, shared among the faithful, and used in the sacrament of communion. In these moments, bread is not just sustenance, it is a holy offering, a symbol of the body of Christ, and a reminder of the shared bond between the villagers and their faith. The bread used in these ceremonies is often made with the finest ingredients, and it is a treat that is reserved for these special occasions. But even in these rare moments, when the bread is more delicate and refined, it is still connected to the same idea. Bread is a source of life, a gift from God, and a representation of the shared struggles and triumphs of the community. As you walk through the village, carrying a loaf of bread to your home, you feel the weight of it. This humble loaf is the key to your survival, and it carries with it the weight of generations of peasants who lived and died by the same staple. It is more than just food, it is a symbol of everything you have endured and everything you will continue to endure. You will bake more bread tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, because bread is what sustains you. It is what keeps you alive. The bread you eat, the bread you share, and the bread you bake are the foundation of your world. In the harsh, unforgiving winters, bread is the one thing that will keep you going, the one thing that can carry you through the hardest of times. It may not be the soft, white bread of the rich, but it is bread all the same, and it is enough. It is a reminder that no matter how difficult the journey, you will survive. You will make it through another winter. And when the harvest comes again, there will be more grain, more bread, and more strength to endure the cold. For now, you will keep your head down, bake your bread, and continue the daily labor that ensures your survival. Bread is life, and life, as harsh as it is, will go on. The village awakens slowly under the gray morning sky, the snow-covered landscape, a silent witness to the harshness of the season. As the first light of day creeps through the small window, the air is cold, heavy with the biting chill that cuts straight through the walls of the modest peasant homes. You stir beneath your threadbare woolen blankets, reluctant to face the reality of another day, but knowing you must rise. The cold is relentless, but so is your hunger. There is no escaping it. You must eat. And for most peasants, the day begins with porridge. Porridge, made from oats, barley, or buckwheat, is the cornerstone of your diet during these long, frigid months. It is the food that fuels you, the warm, comforting bowl that stands between you and the harsh world outside. You can smell the earthy scent of the grains as they simmer over the fire. The sound of bubbling liquid is a familiar, soothing noise, an essential part of your daily routine. It is not just a meal, it is the lifeblood of your survival. Each day, as you sit down to the humble bowl of porridge, you feel a deep connection to the land that has provided the grains. Oats, the most common choice in your village, grow well in the cold soil, making them a staple throughout the harsh winter months. Barley, too, is a common ingredient, hardy and capable of growing in the shorter growing season, giving peasants a reliable, inexpensive food source. Buckwheat, another grain often used for porridge, is tougher still, able to thrive in the poorest soil. This simple dish, made with little more than water, a pinch of salt, and the precious grain, keeps you going through the cold mornings. It doesn't offer much in terms of flavor, but it does offer sustenance. The porridge fills your stomach, providing the necessary calories to fuel you as you move through the endless chores of your day. It is warm against the cold that seeps through your clothes and skin, a small comfort in a world of scarcity and hardship. Porridge is often eaten in the early hours of the day, before you head out to tend to the animals, chop wood, or begin the day's work in the fields. It is typically served in large, communal bowls that are shared among family members. Each person eats quickly, silently, the porridge providing a moment of respite before the grueling labor begins. As children, you were taught to eat quickly and not to complain. The food is not plentiful, but it is enough to keep you alive. The daily bowl of porridge is a symbol of survival, a marker of your existence in a world where food is always uncertain. There is no luxury in this meal. You have no sweeteners to add, no fruits or spices to mix in. The porridge is plain, simple, and filling. It provides warmth and energy, but little else. Sometimes, when the weather is especially brutal, you might find a scrap of meat or leftover vegetables mixed in, but such additions are rare and usually reserved for special occasions. In a time where food is often scarce, any small change in the daily diet is cause for gratitude. And while porridge may not be a feast, it is a lifeline. But porridge is not the only staple of your daily nutrition. Ale, brewed at home using leftover grains, is a vital part of your sustenance. The cold, unsanitary water sources in the village make drinking plain water a risky business, one that can lead to illness and even death. The villagers, both old and young, turn to ale as a safer, more reliable alternative. The ale is brewed in large batches, sometimes made from oats, sometimes from barley, depending on what is available. The grains are boiled, fermented, and left to ferment in large casks, where the process of brewing turns the leftover grain into a drinkable, nutritious beverage. Ale, in many ways, is the drink of survival. It provides hydration, calories, and a little bit of warmth. It also helps to stave off the hunger that can take hold during the long hours of manual labor. The strength of the ale can vary, depending on how long it has fermented and how much grain has been used. It is often consumed in large quantities throughout the day, from early morning to late afternoon. Even children, though given weaker versions of the ale, drink it regularly, as it is a safer option than drinking the local water, which is often contaminated with bacteria and parasites. For the adults, ale is more than just a drink. It is a source of socialization. In the evenings, after the day's work is done, the local tavern is the gathering place where villagers come to relax, share stories, and drink together. It is in these moments, around a shared keg of ale, that the bonds of community are forged. The tavern is often where important news is shared, decisions are made, and new ideas are exchanged. In a way, the ale brings people together, even in a world where social structures are rigid and life is dictated by the need to survive. Yet, even in its abundance, ale is not without its dangers. The brewing process, if done improperly, can lead to dangerous infections or spoiled batches, making the drink potentially hazardous to consume. But for most peasants, the benefits of drinking ale far outweigh the risks. It is far more likely that the ale will nourish you, offering the calories and hydration needed to survive the harsh days, than it is to harm you. And in a world where survival is never guaranteed, the comfort of knowing that you have access to something as simple and essential as ale brings a sense of security. Despite the simplicity of both porridge and ale, these two food staples form the backbone of your nutrition. Porridge keeps you warm and fed, while ale provides hydration and sustenance. These basic foods are the foundation of your daily existence, the things that you rely on to get you through each day. As you settle down to eat your porridge in the morning, with a mug of ale by your side, you reflect on how far these humble foods go to support you in this harsh, unforgiving world. The simplicity of your diet stands in stark contrast to the complexities of modern living. In the world today, food is often seen as a luxury, a pleasure to be enjoyed in abundance. Choices, flavors, and variety are all too common, yet they are luxuries that the medieval peasant could only dream of. For you, food is about survival. Bread, porridge, and ale. There is no room for indulgence, no time for fancy meals, and yet, in its simplicity, there is a kind of richness. Bread sustains you, porridge warms you, and ale provides comfort. These are the foods that keep you alive, that keep you strong, and that define the essence of life in your village. As the first snowflakes of winter settle on the frozen ground, the harsh chill of the season makes itself felt even inside your humble cottage. The warmth from the fire crackles and hisses, but it does little to erase the biting cold that seeps through the walls, the roof, and even the floors. The days grow shorter, and the nights, long and dark, stretch endlessly. In such a world, where survival hinges on the resources collected in the previous seasons, the foods you rely on are few, but vital, none more so than salted meat and the precious animal fats that have been carefully preserved for the winter. Salted meat, in particular, is a cornerstone of your diet during these long, harsh months. The process of preserving meat through salting or smoking is as ancient as the need for survival itself. In the months leading up to the cold season, there is a flurry of activity as families butcher their livestock, prepare the meat, and seal it in salt to ensure that it can withstand the long months without spoiling. The meat, often pork or beef, is rubbed down with salt and placed in barrels or hung in cool, dry places to cure. The salt draws out moisture, preventing the growth of bacteria, and helps to preserve the meat in a world where refrigeration is a concept far beyond reach. In the winter months, fresh meat is a rare luxury. You can't afford to indulge in it, not when the supply of freshly butchered animals has dwindled and the hunt has become more difficult. The salted meat, however, is an essential food source, providing the necessary protein and calories to fuel your daily activities. Each cut of salted pork or beef is a treasure, carefully rationed to make sure it lasts until the next thaw. When it's time to eat, the meat is often boiled to soften it, the tough fibers made tender by slow cooking. It might be mixed into stews, boiled with vegetables, or simply eaten on its own. While it may not be the most flavorful of meals, it is filling, sustaining you through the grueling labor of chopping wood, tending to animals, or clearing snow from paths. The practice of salting meat is not just about preservation. It's also about practicality. It's the only way to ensure that you have access to the calories necessary to survive when fresh food is unavailable. The salted meat has become a part of your life, a symbol of survival in an unforgiving world. The salt preserves the meat, but also the very essence of life itself, the hope that even as winter rages on, there will be food to eat and energy to continue. But salted meat is not the only form of preservation that ensures your survival. Fat, particularly from butter and lard, is just as critical, and perhaps even more vital, during the colder months. Animal fat is rich in energy and necessary to maintain warmth in the cold. Just as salt preserves meat, fat provides nourishment, offering the calories needed to sustain strength throughout the day. Fat is used in nearly everything, for cooking, for baking, and even as a spread for bread or porridge. Without the comforting richness of fat, life in winter would be even more difficult, with a constant gnawing hunger that no amount of bread or salted meat could assuage. Butter and lard are a treasured commodity in your household. They are prepared and stored with the same care as salted meat. Each batch of lard is carefully rendered from the fat of pigs, then stored in large earthenware jars. Butter, often made from milk that has been carefully separated, churned, and salted for preservation, is another staple that provides essential fat. It is smeared on bread, added to porridge, or used to cook the salted meat. Fat is the energy source that helps you keep warm in the dead of winter, when a fire is often your only ally in the fight against the cold. Fat also adds flavor, an important element in a diet that is otherwise bland and monotonous. The rich, hearty taste of butter or lard makes the porridge and salted meat more palatable, turning what would be a bland, dry meal into something that feels like a small indulgence. It is these small comforts, even in the most basic of meals, that make life in the medieval world bearable, even in the darkest months of winter. But fat isn't just for cooking or adding flavor, it also serves as an important tool in personal care. During the cold months, the wind and the chill leave the skin cracked and raw. The use of animal fats for salves and ointments becomes a necessity. A smear of lard or butter can soothe the roughness of your hands, face, and lips, protecting the skin from the harsh weather and preventing it from cracking. Fat, in this way, becomes not just a source of nourishment but also a form of self-care, an essential element of survival in an era where comfort and luxury are distant concepts. As you go about your day, whether you are tending to the animals, repairing the roof, or gathering firewood, the salted meat and animal fat provide not only sustenance but also the energy required to get through the day's work. These foods are not just provisions. They are the cornerstone of your survival strategy, ensuring that you have the strength and endurance to meet the demands of your environment. The importance of salted meat and fat cannot be overstated. Without them, survival would be a much harder task, and the cold, relentless winter would claim far more lives than it already does. The ritual of preparing and consuming these preserved foods is a reminder of the harsh reality you live in. There are no luxuries, no easy fixes, no quick solutions. The medieval world, especially during the winter, is unforgiving, and survival is a daily battle against the elements, the food supply, and the demands of society. Salted meat and fat, the humble staples that make up the majority of your diet, are as much a part of the landscape as the snow-covered ground and the cold winds. They are the essential ingredients that allow you to endure the harshest conditions, and in their simplicity, they embody the resilience and determination required to make it through each day. For all their simplicity, salted meat and fat represent the underlying strength of medieval life. They are the foods of survival, the means by which peasants, like you, endure the seasons. They remind you of the incredible adaptability of the human spirit in the face of hardship and the ingenuity that is required to live in such difficult times. In a world where death and hunger are always looming, it is these simple, humble foods that make all the difference between survival and despair. As you sit down to your meal of salted pork or beef, with a side of bread smeared with butter or lard, you realize that it is not just the food itself that sustains you, but the knowledge that it is enough. In a world full of challenges and dangers, the simplest meals can provide the strength to face another day. It is this quiet, unspoken resilience, fueled by the salted meat and fat, that keeps you going through the long, dark winters. They are not just foods. They are the essence of survival. As the harsh winter sets in, the land is barren, and the once bountiful harvests are but a memory. The cold stretches endlessly, its sharp fingers biting through the thick wool of your coat as you go about the essential tasks that keep the community running. The once green fields now lie dormant, covered in a thick blanket of snow, and food becomes a commodity to be carefully rationed. Yet, amidst the scarcity, there are a few foods that hold a special place in your winter diet: cheese and eggs. These simple, yet vital, sources of nutrition provide the energy and sustenance needed to endure the season, their value far outweighing their humble nature. Dairy, especially cheese made from goats or sheep's milk, is not just a comforting indulgence, it is a vital part of the diet, particularly in winter when fresh produce is scarce. For peasants like you, whose daily existence is a struggle against the elements, cheese is a much-needed boost to your energy levels. The process of making cheese is labor-intensive, requiring not just skill but patience. It begins with the milking of your animals, a task that in itself is hard work. Goats and sheep are kept for their milk, but in winter, their productivity slows down, and the amount of fresh milk they provide is limited. Therefore, to preserve this precious resource, cheese-making becomes an art. The milk is carefully curdled, and once separated, the curds are drained and pressed into forms. These cheeses are then aged, and as they mature, their flavors deepen, becoming sharper and more robust. In a world without refrigeration, the preservation of food is a challenge. Cheese, especially hard cheeses like those made from goats or sheep's milk, can withstand the test of time, lasting throughout the winter months when other fresh foods would have spoiled long ago. This long-lasting quality makes cheese a valuable commodity for survival. It provides the necessary fats and proteins that are crucial when other sources of nutrition are scarce. A wedge of cheese can be eaten on its own, added to a simple bread meal, or even used to enhance the flavor of a winter stew. Whether consumed as a standalone food or paired with other staples, cheese becomes an indispensable part of the medieval peasant diet. Cheese made from goats or sheep's milk is particularly prized for its richness in nutrients. Goat's milk is more easily digestible than cow's milk, making it an ideal source of nourishment for those with limited access to other foods. The fat content in the milk gives the cheese a satisfying, hearty feel, keeping hunger at bay during the long, cold hours. Sheep's milk, similarly, produces a cheese that is rich in nutrients and has a strong, distinct flavor, adding variety to the often monotonous winter diet. Together, these cheeses are not only a source of sustenance, but a reminder of the resourcefulness and self-sufficiency required to survive in the harsh medieval world. Eggs, another essential part of the medieval diet, offer a fleeting delight during the winter months. While eggs are abundant in the warmer seasons, providing a welcome source of protein, their availability decreases significantly as the weather turns cold. The hens slow down their egg production, and so eggs become a rare and treasured commodity during the winter. When available, they are eagerly awaited and carefully consumed, often saved for special occasions or shared among family members during feasts. Unlike today, where eggs are readily available in markets and supermarkets, in medieval times, eggs were a limited resource, highly dependent on the seasons and the productivity of the farm animals. The scarcity of eggs in winter meant that every egg had to be carefully managed, often saved for a moment when its nutritional value was most needed. Eggs were consumed in a variety of ways: boiled, fried, or mixed into a hearty porridge. Their versatility made them a highly prized item in the peasant's diet, and even a single egg could provide a significant boost to a day's meals. In the colder months, when fresh food is in short supply, eggs often become the centerpiece of any celebratory meal. They were a delicacy, something to be enjoyed with a sense of special occasion. A small feast might be built around eggs, and their presence on the table, even if only as a few, was a symbol of abundance, a much-needed source of nutrition. However, eggs were not just consumed fresh. Due to their limited availability, preservation techniques were often employed to extend their shelf life. One common method was to pack the eggs in salt, a practice that allowed them to last for several months. Salted eggs, while not as fresh as those gathered in the spring, still provided essential nutrients and could be eaten when the supply of fresh eggs had run dry. Additionally, eggs played a crucial role in baking. While bread was the primary staple of the medieval diet, cakes and other baked goods were also prepared for special occasions, particularly during festivals or religious observances. Eggs were necessary for the creation of dough, providing structure, moisture, and richness to the pastries. Without eggs, the rich textures and flavors of these baked goods would be impossible to achieve. In this way, eggs were integral not just to the everyday diet, but to the celebratory and ritualistic aspects of medieval life. Both cheese and egg served as more than just food. They were vital symbols of survival, resilience, and ingenuity. The peasants who relied on these foods had learned to adapt and make use of every available resource. Cheese was not just a meal, it was the product of a labor-intensive process that demonstrated self-sufficiency. It was the result of months of effort, and its preservation allowed people to survive the winter without starving. Eggs, while scarce, were a reminder of nature's rhythms and the delicate balance of life on the farm. They were both a seasonal delight and a sign of hope, a symbol that even in the harshest months, there was something to look forward to. The medieval peasants, in their struggle for survival, were united by their dependence on these simple foods. They found comfort in the shared meals of bread, cheese, and eggs, passed down from generation to generation. These foods became a bond between the individuals and the community, a communal resource that reminded everyone of their shared purpose and their shared fate. The small pleasures of a meal made from these simple foods, while not luxurious, were an important part of daily life. They were a testament to the ingenuity and resilience required to thrive in a world that could be unforgiving and harsh. In the end, cheese and eggs were not just sustenance. They were the products of an ancient connection to the land and the seasons, and the living history of those who struggled to survive. The humble presence of these foods on the table, rich in their simplicity and necessity, reminded the medieval peasant that, despite the hardships of the world, there was always something to nourish both body and soul. As the frigid winter winds howl outside and the thick blanket of snow covers the village, survival depends on the ingenuity of the people. Food is scarce, and the harsh conditions make each day a battle to endure. Yet, in the midst of this bleakness, there are small gifts provided by nature that offer both nourishment and healing. Root vegetables like turnips, leeks, and cabbage grow stubbornly in the cold soil, while herbs such as thyme, rosemary, and garlic add flavor and medicinal properties to otherwise simple meals. Foraging becomes an essential part of survival, and villagers rely on these wild foods, harvesting what nature has left behind, while holding on to the belief that certain plants and herbs have protective and healing powers. The root vegetables, humble as they may seem, are a cornerstone of the medieval peasant's winter diet. Root vegetables, like turnips, leeks, and cabbage, are some of the few crops that thrive in the cold. They are hardy and grow deep into the soil, where they are shielded from the biting winds above. These vegetables are not only a vital source of calories, but are also packed with essential nutrients that help stave off malnutrition during the long months of winter. Turnips, often considered the poor man's potato, are a key staple in the diet. With their earthy, mild flavor, they are versatile and can be prepared in various ways: boiled, roasted, or mashed. While not as flavorful or rich as some other foods, turnips provide a reliable source of sustenance when nothing else is available. They are particularly important during the colder months when fresh produce is limited, and the root's ability to store nutrients in the ground makes it a vital resource. Peasants often relied on turnips not only to feed their families but also to feed livestock, ensuring the survival of both humans and animals during the harsh season. Leeks, with their mild onion-like flavor, are another essential root vegetable that offers both nutrition and flavor. They are often used to season broths and stews, adding depth and richness to meals made from limited ingredients. Leeks are also believed to have medicinal properties, acting as a mild diuretic and helping to clear the respiratory system, which is important during the cold winter months when illness often runs rampant. In medieval times, the leek was not only seen as a food but also as a symbol of resilience and strength. Ancient folklore attributed great value to the leek, and many villagers planted them in their gardens, hoping that these plants would offer them both nourishment and protection from illness. Cabbage, another staple, is hardy and can be kept in storage for months without losing its nutritional value. It provides the essential vitamins and minerals necessary for survival, especially when other foods are scarce. Cabbage was often fermented to make sauerkraut, a simple dish that preserved the vegetable and provided a source of probiotics. Sauerkraut, often paired with salted meats, was a staple in the winter months, adding a tangy, fermented flavor to otherwise bland meals. Cabbage was also used in stews and soups, helping to stretch limited food supplies and providing a bit of relief from the monotony of root vegetables. In addition to these root vegetables, herbs and wild plants also played an essential role in the winter diet and overall health of the villagers. Herbs such as thyme, rosemary, and garlic are not only valuable for their culinary uses, but also for their medicinal properties. Thyme, with its pungent aroma and earthy flavor, was commonly used to flavor stews, soups, and meats. In medieval times, thyme was also believed to have protective qualities. It was thought to ward off evil spirits and offer healing properties for coughs, colds, and infections. Rosemary, another commonly used herb, was believed to have similar healing properties and was used as a remedy for a variety of ailments, from digestive issues to memory loss. It was also believed that rosemary could protect the home and its inhabitants from illness and bad luck, and it was often placed around doorways and windowsills as a form of protection. Garlic, perhaps the most well-known herb, was highly valued in the medieval diet for its flavor and medicinal properties. Garlic was believed to possess the ability to cleanse the body, purify the air, and fight off diseases. It was often used to season food, but it also found its place in numerous folk remedies. Garlic was believed to ward off the plague, which was a constant threat during medieval times, and many villagers would carry cloves of garlic with them to protect themselves. It was also commonly used in poultices and tonics, as it was believed to fight off infections and boost the immune system. For peasants living in harsh conditions, garlic was a form of protection not just from disease but also from the cold, as it was said to help warm the body. Foraging for wild foods became especially important during times of scarcity, and peasants had to rely on their knowledge of the land to find what nature had to offer. Forests, fields, and meadows were full of wild greens, mushrooms, berries, and herbs that could supplement the peasant diet. Mushrooms, although they required careful identification, were highly sought after during the winter months. The wild fungi provided essential nutrients and were often used in soups, stews, and pies. Some mushrooms, like chanterelles and morels, were particularly prized for their earthy flavors, and when dried, they could be stored and used throughout the winter. However, foraging for mushrooms was not without its risks. Many poisonous mushrooms grew alongside the edible ones, and a mistake in identification could lead to severe illness or death. Berries, which were harvested in the summer months, were also an essential part of the winter diet. Although fresh berries were no longer available in the colder months, peasants would preserve them by drying them, turning them into jams, or using them in pies. Wild berries like elderberries, blackberries, and raspberries were full of antioxidants and vitamins, helping to prevent scurvy during the long winter months when fresh fruit and vegetables were scarce. The preservation of these wild fruits was a labor-intensive process, but it was vital for survival. The connection between foraging and folk beliefs was deeply ingrained in medieval culture. Many villagers believed that certain herbs and plants had magical properties, offering protection from illness, bad luck, or evil spirits. Plants like elderflower, hawthorn, and mistletoe were often seen as sacred, and they were used in various rituals and superstitions. Elderflowers, for example, were thought to have the power to protect against witches and evil spirits. Mistletoe, which grew in the hollows of trees, was considered a symbol of fertility and was often used in ceremonies to ensure a good harvest or to protect the home. These plants were not just food, but also a part of the larger system of survival that relied on the interplay of nature, tradition, and belief. In times of famine or scarcity, foraging took on a more urgent and desperate tone. When crops failed or food was scarce, villagers would turn to the land for what they could find, gathering wild greens, roots, and berries to supplement their meager supplies. These wild foods were often the difference between life and death during the harshest winters. Foraging became an essential skill, one passed down through generations, as peasants relied on their deep knowledge of the land to stay alive. The belief in the healing properties of plants and herbs was not only tied to survival but also to the magical thinking that permeated medieval life. Herbal remedies were used not just for their physical benefits, but also for their spiritual and protective qualities. It was believed that the right combination of herbs could ward off disease, protect the home, and bring good fortune. Even the most ordinary plants, like dandelions or nettles, were seen as powerful tools in the fight against the harshness of winter and the dangers it brought. The reliance on herbs, vegetables, and wild foods in medieval life was a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of peasants. These foods were more than just sustenance, they were a lifeline, a connection to the land, and a key part of the survival strategy in a world that was as dangerous as it was beautiful. Whether it was the humble turnip providing a solid base for the diet, or the wild mushrooms adding flavor and nutrition, these foods allowed peasants to endure the long, cold winters. And in a world where every season brought its own challenges, the knowledge of foraging and the belief in the healing power of nature helped ensure that life could continue, even in the face of scarcity. The simple yet vital foods of medieval life were not only necessary for survival, but were also imbued with cultural significance, making them much more than mere ingredients. They were a reflection of the connection between people, land, and the mysteries of the natural world. In the heart of a medieval village, food was not merely a commodity, it was a lifeline, the thread that connected each individual to the community and the land. In a world where survival depended on limited resources and harsh seasonal changes, food was both the key to life and a bond that united the people. During the long, unforgiving winter months, food and communal meals became more than just sustenance. They were expressions of solidarity, of shared struggle, and the cornerstone of what it meant to live in a community where survival depended on one another. Meals in a medieval peasant household were seldom solitary affairs. The harshness of the medieval world demanded a level of collective effort to ensure that everyone was fed. In a typical household, food was shared by all members of the family, and sometimes even extended to others in the village. These shared meals were more than simple acts of nourishment. They were vital social events, fostering a sense of unity and mutual reliance. When the family sat down to eat, the food often wasn't just for personal consumption. The table was where the resources of the household were pooled, where bread, porridge, and stews made from preserved meats and root vegetables became the fabric of survival. Everyone ate together, from the eldest to the youngest, with no waste to be found. A family meal could be as simple as a communal pot of pottage or stew, which was served in large bowls from which everyone helped themselves. Even the smallest households were rarely isolated. Neighbors or extended family might be invited in to share in the meal, especially if the winter proved particularly harsh. Communal eating was not just about sharing food, it was also about preserving resources. When there wasn't enough to go around, every scrap was carefully portioned. In times of abundance, sharing meals became a way to ensure that no one went hungry and that there was collective strength in numbers. A family might invite another to join in their meal, or they might share whatever they could in the market, ensuring that no one in the community was left without. The shared act of eating created ties that went beyond just family, building a network of mutual support and compassion within the village. In many cases, communal eating extended beyond the immediate family. Neighbors would often come together to share meals, pooling their meager food supplies to make a larger meal. This sharing wasn't just about food, it was about keeping the community intact. People understood that survival wasn't guaranteed if they only looked out for themselves. It was a way of reinforcing relationships and ensuring that, when times were difficult, there would be someone to help. The shared meals weren't just symbolic of cooperation, they were essential for survival. People had little, but they had each other. This communal spirit was seen in the way resources were carefully guarded and shared. Leftovers from the communal meal might be passed on to others, ensuring that no one went hungry, especially the elderly or children. In these small acts of kindness, a culture of cooperation was built, one that was crucial for surviving the long, cold winters where food was scarce and resources even scarcer. While communal meals helped sustain the people on a local level, the village market was where the wider exchange of food and resources took place. The market served as the lifeblood of the village economy, where people could trade, barter, and purchase the food staples that they couldn't grow or produce themselves. It was where peasants could supplement their limited diets with seasonal items or trade items that they had in abundance for those they lacked. Market life was bustling, chaotic, and full of opportunity. For a medieval peasant, visiting the market wasn't just an errand, it was an event that could make or break the winter months. At the market, peasants could barter with others to obtain foodstuffs they had not been able to produce themselves, such as salt, spices, or the coveted grain. Farmers might exchange their excess potatoes for salt or a bit of fish, while others might trade preserved meats for dairy or cloth. The marketplace became a place where every family's survival was somewhat reliant on others, ensuring that no one went without the essentials. In the market, food wasn't just exchanged for money. Most peasants didn't have much of that to spare. Instead, bartering was the primary means of trade. Bartering allowed for flexibility. People could trade anything of value. For example, a small farmer with a surplus of oats might trade them for vegetables, while a fisherwoman might offer fresh fish in exchange for wool or meat. These exchanges were not only about necessity, they were about sustaining each other through the winter months. The barter system, deeply rooted in community trust, created a network of support that went beyond individual households and extended throughout the entire village. But the market wasn't just a place for peasants, it was a reflection of the larger world around them. It represented the duality of medieval life, a place where wealth and poverty collided. The wealthy villagers, for example, could afford to purchase more expensive items like wine or imported fruits. They might even pay for goods that poorer peasants would never have access to. Meanwhile, the less fortunate would have to make do with what they could afford, perhaps purchasing only the most basic of items such as flour, eggs, or preserved meats. The market reflected the stark class divisions that permeated medieval society. Despite these differences in wealth, the market also provided a kind of unity. People from all walks of life converged in the village square, exchanging goods and engaging in a brief, shared experience of commerce. Even as wealth dictated what goods were available to different classes, the market was a place where people from all backgrounds could come together, share stories, and trade their resources. For peasants, the market was often the key to survival. It was where they could find the last bit of flour, a piece of cheese, or a hunk of salted meat that they couldn't produce themselves. Without the market, survival in the winter months would have been much more difficult. It was a lifeline, a way for the people to ensure that they could continue to feed themselves and their families during the harshest months of the year. And while there was danger in the unpredictability of the winter months, the market's importance in securing food made it an essential part of the medieval peasant's existence. Yet, despite its necessity, the market wasn't without its own challenges and dangers. Medieval markets were often overcrowded, noisy, and unsanitary. Without modern sanitation or food safety regulations, the risk of contamination was high. Meat could spoil quickly, especially during the summer months, and poor preservation methods meant that people might end up purchasing food that was tainted or unsafe. These hidden risks added another layer of difficulty to the already challenging existence of the peasants. Diseases like the plague, cholera, and dysentery often spread rapidly in such crowded and unsanitary environments. The market was often a breeding ground for illness, as people from various parts of the village gathered in proximity, exchanging goods and services. The spread of disease was nearly impossible to control, and the risk of getting sick at the market was a constant concern for everyone. Furthermore, the lack of modern transportation meant that goods had to travel long distances, often on poorly maintained roads, making it difficult to ensure that food remained safe and fresh. Spoiled or contaminated food was often sold in the market, and the peasants, unfamiliar with the risks of foodborne illness, might unknowingly purchase such items. At the same time, the market was a place where life and death collided. While it was a site of commerce, it was also a reflection of the struggles for survival. A bad harvest or a poor trade could lead to hunger or worse. For peasants, every market day was a gamble, a chance to obtain the essentials they needed to survive the coming days, but also a place where they might face disappointment, hunger, or even illness. The exchange of goods in the market was often a matter of life and death, and it demonstrated how precarious the medieval peasant's existence truly was. In the medieval village, food was more than just a necessity. It was a bond that tied the community together. Shared meals and bartered goods in the market ensured that peasants could survive harsh winters, and in many ways, the market became the heart of village life. The exchange of food, both within households and in the marketplace, represented a deeper connection to the land, the community, and the struggle for survival. The market and the communal meals were essential parts of the medieval peasant's experience. In a world where every morsel of food counted, survival was not just an individual endeavor, it was a collective effort. From the bustling, noisy markets to the quiet moments shared over a simple meal in the home, food was a constant reminder of the precariousness of life, the reliance on others, and the resilience required to navigate the harsh realities of medieval existence. Despite the dangers, the villagers knew that together they could survive whatever the winter brought. In medieval times, food was never just about survival. It was intrinsically linked to religion, rituals, and the deep cultural traditions that govern daily life. As you move through the village during the harsh winter, you realize that food is much more than just fuel for the body. It's a symbol of faith, a tool for spiritual connection, and a marker of time and season. When you sit at the table of your small, humble home, you understand that the meals shared with your fellow villagers are laden with meaning, far beyond the immediate need to fill your belly. They are part of a rhythm that follows the church calendar, a rhythm that guides the seasons, marking sacred moments in time. One of the most important aspects of medieval life is the connection between food and the church. Feast and fasting are two sides of the same coin, alternating through the year to shape both the body and the soul. Church feasts, which coincide with key religious holidays, are times of indulgence, but they are also much more than opportunities to eat. They are moments of spiritual nourishment, offering relief and joy to weary hearts. The Harvest Festival, for instance, marks the end of the growing season, a time to celebrate the fruits of labor, give thanks for the harvest, and enjoy abundant food after the long months of work. The church's role in these feasts is as much about spiritual gratitude as it is about feasting. The tables are filled with the best of the season's crops, meats from the animals that were slaughtered for the occasion, and breads and pastries that have been carefully prepared for this sacred moment. But it is not simply the food that matters. It is the sense of community, the gathering of all the village's people in the name of faith and celebration. The feasts are a time for joy and togetherness, where the rich and poor, the sick and healthy, all sit down together to partake in the same meal. It is a rare moment when the divisions between people are momentarily set aside. As the day progresses, the sounds of laughter and conversation fill the air. The clinking of pewter mugs filled with ale and wine accompanies the warmth of the crackling fire. For a short while, the burdens of daily life seem lighter, the hardships of winter less oppressive. As a child, you remember eagerly awaiting these feasts, the air alive with the smells of roasting meat, baked goods, and the sweet fragrances of spiced wines. But it is not just the food that comforts you. It is the sense of belonging, of being part of something larger than yourself, connected to the community and to the divine. However, there is also a darker side to the cycle of feasts, and that is fasting. Fasting days are integral to the Church's religious observances, designed to purify the body and soul, to bring the faithful closer to God. The seasons of fasting are a contrast to the feasting, marked by austerity and sacrifice. During these periods, you and your fellow villagers must refrain from indulging in rich foods. The bread you eat is made from coarser grains, the meats are limited, and the wine, once abundant during feasts, is now restricted. These days of fasting are a trial, a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of humility. But they are also an opportunity for spiritual reflection. The act of denying oneself is seen as a way of cleansing the soul, purifying it for the higher purpose of faith. It is a practice that requires discipline, but also provides a certain comfort in knowing that it is part of a larger divine order. As the days of fasting wear on, you sometimes find yourself longing for the warm, rich stews and freshly baked bread that mark the feasts. But there is also a deep sense of accomplishment, a quiet peace that comes with living according to the Church's calendar, adhering to its rules and its rhythm. And then, of course, there are the rituals around food that are rooted in the culture and traditions of the time. Every meal you eat, every piece of bread you break, has meaning. Certain foods have symbolic importance, representing various aspects of life and death, fertility and protection. Bread, for instance, is not just a source of sustenance, it is a sacred food, often used in religious rituals and offerings. The bread made for communion, consecrated during Mass, is believed to hold divine power. To eat this bread is to partake in the body of Christ, to be spiritually nourished in a way that transcends the physical. In many homes, bread is blessed before it is consumed, and it is carefully saved to be used in the most sacred moments. The act of eating bread, especially on feast days, takes on an almost sacramental significance. It becomes a moment to reflect on the divine, to give thanks, and to acknowledge the source of all nourishment, both spiritual and physical. Similarly, other foods such as apples, eggs, and wine are laden with meaning. Apples, a symbol of knowledge, are often given as offerings to the saints or used in traditional remedies to ward off illness. Eggs, though scarce in winter, are symbols of new life and rebirth, making them highly prized during springtime and festivals. They are often included in celebrations that mark the arrival of new life, such as Easter, where they symbolize the resurrection and the hope of renewal. Wine, too, has its place in religious rituals, often used to symbolize the blood of Christ during communion. But beyond its religious symbolism, it is also a symbol of celebration and joy, an essential part of the feast that binds the community together. When you drink from your pewter cup, you remember the centuries-old tradition that connects you to the people who came before you, to the generations of peasants and nobles alike who have shared in these rituals since time immemorial. Food, for the medieval peasant, is never just about sustenance. It is a means of survival, but also a way to connect with the divine and the community. Whether you are partaking in the communal feast, observing the fasts of the Church, or offering prayers over your simple meal, the act of eating is one of the most profound rituals of medieval life. It ties you to the rhythm of the seasons, to the divine cycle of feasts and fasts, and to the unspoken bonds that hold the village together. Even in times of scarcity, even in the darkest months of winter, food is the thread that weaves the fabric of life. It is at once a means of survival and a reminder of the spiritual sustenance that sustains you through even the harshest of time. So, when you sit down to eat, whether it's a humble bowl of porridge or a richly prepared feast, know that you are partaking in something much larger than just a meal. You are part of a legacy of rituals and traditions that spans centuries, rooted deeply in faith, culture, and the enduring spirit of community. As you awaken in the chill of the medieval winter morning, the weight of the coldness surrounding your village becomes impossible to ignore. Outside, the snow falls in heavy sheets, blanketing the land in an icy shroud. The world feels still and silent, and even the winds seem to be holding their breath. The days of the long, harsh winter months are stretching on, testing the resilience of every person in the village. You and your fellow villagers know better than most how survival hinges not just on the physical resources at your disposal, but on the strength of the community that holds you all together. For without this unity, the cold would be unbearable, and the hardships would become insurmountable. In the medieval world, survival through winter was never an individual feat. You relied on the people around you, the other peasants, the neighbors, the elders, and children who shared in the struggles of daily life. These were not the days when isolation was an option. Every person played a vital role in the fabric of the community, and that connection was your greatest source of strength during the most difficult times of the year. The cold months are long, often stretching from the end of autumn all the way into the early days of spring. Without the modern comforts of central heating, insulated homes, or even basic tools to keep warm, life was a struggle. Yet, through it all, you and your neighbors found warmth in each other. The warmth of shared experiences, the strength in knowing you were all facing the same challenges, and the unspoken bond that connected you all. You weren't alone, and that made all the difference. In the small, tight-knit village where you reside, homes are packed close together, and the boundaries between lives are fluid. The houses, though humble, are filled with the noise of life. The sounds of children playing, the hum of activity as families prepare their meager meals, and the low murmur of conversation among the adults as they tend to their daily chores. But it's in the communal spaces, the hearths, the shared kitchens, the meeting halls, that the heart of the village beats the loudest. This is where solidarity grows, where the struggles of the season are born together, and where survival is not only a matter of sustenance, but also of shared emotion. When food is scarce, and warmth even more so, it's the gathering of people around a common fire that provides the most relief. You're not just gathering for warmth, you're gathering for reassurance, for the comfort of companionship in the face of relentless hardship. The shared meals are not just a chance to eat, but to be with others, to remind each other that the winter will end and the sun will rise again. When a neighbor's family is without food, your own table becomes a place where nothing is ever wasted. The grain of kindness flourishes as it mingles with bread and stew. The importance of togetherness cannot be overstated, especially when each day feels as though it might bring new challenges. The bonds you share with the villagers go beyond the simple act of survival. They are emotional and spiritual lifelines that tether you to something greater than just individual existence. Without them, you would be lost. These bonds help lift you when your spirits sag under the weight of the cold, when the hunger gnaws at your belly, or when the fear of the unknown tightens its grip on your heart. Through the darkest days of winter, it's these connections that keep you going. The warmth of shared fires, the laughter that bubbles up from the children as they run in the snow, and the steady hum of the village's collective heartbeat. Everyone has a part to play, from the young ones who gather wood, to the older women who spin wool for the community's clothing, to the men who brave the frozen forests for firewood or hunt for game. Each person's role is vital, no matter how small it may seem. The social ties in the village are not only practical but emotional, weaving the lives of individuals together into a collective spirit of mutual support. Even during the hardest moments, when food is low and the cold cuts through your bones, you find solace in the knowledge that you are not alone. You all share the same fears, the same hopes, and the same need for each other. In such a harsh world, trust becomes the most valuable currency, knowing that if you falter, your neighbor will step in to help, and vice versa. Beyond the necessity of food and shelter, it's the little rituals, the shared acts of daily life that bind you together. As the days go by, your community comes together in small ways. Gatherings to tell stories by the fire, singing songs to ease the monotony of cold nights, and the exchange of news and gossip that reaffirms the ties that bind you to your neighbors. It is here, in these quiet moments, that the true power of the community becomes apparent. Even in the worst of times, laughter echoes in the homes, and stories of the past bring a sense of continuity that connects you to those who lived before. Storytelling, in particular, plays a vital role in maintaining the psychological well-being of the villagers. The tales of heroic ancestors, or the fables, passed down through generations, help to reinforce a sense of identity, and they provide comfort in knowing that the community has survived hardship before. It's not just about telling a story. It's about remembering where you came from, what you've overcome, and what lies ahead. Through these tales, the community passes on its collective wisdom, and the strength to continue facing each day of winter is renewed. But these social ties are not limited to the adults. The children, too, have their place in the winter routine. They are not just witnesses to the hardship. They are participants in it, whether they are helping with chores, gathering wood for the fire, or playing in the snow. They are learning the importance of community from an early age. Their laughter and energy provide the much-needed light in the dark days of winter. It's this intergenerational exchange of knowledge, support, and love that ensures the continuity of village life, even through the harshest seasons. The communal life of the village isn't without its tensions, of course. No community is perfect, and there are always those who, for one reason or another, find themselves at odds with others. But even in times of discord, the overall sense of solidarity remains strong. The understanding that survival depends on everyone's contribution, whether large or small, creates a foundation of trust that is hard to break. When the sun finally begins to return, signaling the end of winter's grip, it is this sense of community that endures. The warmth of spring is not just a relief from the cold, but a reminder that no matter how difficult the winter, you've made it together. And with each passing year, the village grows stronger, united by the shared experience of overcoming adversity. In many ways, the community's survival is not just about physical endurance, but about the emotional strength that comes from knowing that no one has to face the cold alone. The shared meals, the collective efforts, and the constant presence of one another create a bond that's stronger than any storm. For in the end, it is not just the food you eat or the shelter you find that keeps you alive, but the support of those around you. In this village, you don't survive because you can fend for yourself. You survive because you know that, together, you can endure anything. Winter in a medieval village is an experience that tests every fiber of one's being. It is not just the cold that gnaws at you, but the harshness of nature itself, the unyielding challenges that come with the lack of warmth, the scarcity of food, and the constant battle for survival. Each day of winter feels like an uphill struggle, and every hour spent outside in the biting wind, every step taken across frozen ground, is a reminder of just how demanding life can be. It is a time when endurance is no longer a choice, but a necessity, when the human spirit must reach deep within itself for the strength to keep moving forward, to continue the battle against the relentless winter. As you rise from your humble bed, the cold morning air hits you like a shock to the system. The blankets are heavy, but they cannot shield you from the chill that seeps into the bones, the frost that clings to the windows, and the silence that blankets the village. Life, for all its vibrancy during the rest of the year, becomes a muted affair in the winter months. The harsh conditions force you to prioritize only the essentials, survival. Yet, in that silence, you are never truly alone. The village, despite the harsh realities of the season, holds together. You find yourself walking alongside your neighbors, each of you carrying the same burdens, the same daily struggles. The cold is relentless, but the community, the familiarity of shared hardship, is a comfort. It is the glue that holds you together, and it is this bond that makes even the worst winters bearable. The routine of the village becomes a solace in itself. Each day follows the same pattern. Wake up to the chill, gather around the hearth, work the land or tend to the livestock, and try to ensure that the food stores last. Every movement is calculated, every decision weighed against the knowledge that resources are limited and that survival depends on each person doing their part. The familiarity of the cycle provides a psychological anchor. You know what to expect. There are no surprises in the rhythm of life, just the steady march of time toward the promise of spring. But this repetitive routine, while providing stability, is not without its psychological toll. The lack of variety, the limited interaction, and the constant focus on survival can erode one's sense of self, particularly when times are tough. The harsh weather means fewer opportunities for socializing, and the extended period spent indoors can cause a sense of isolation. The pressure to endure, to be strong and resilient despite the unrelenting demands of the season, can weigh heavily on your mind. For some, it leads to feelings of despair, of weariness. The sheer exhaustion from constant physical labor, coupled with the emotional strain of knowing that there is no easy way out, can cause a deep mental fatigue that gnaws at your soul. However, it is during these moments of psychological strain that the true resilience of the village emerges. In the darkest days of winter, it is the support of others, the shared stories, the communal laughter that provides a crucial lifeline. There is strength in unity, a collective spirit that allows you to keep going when every part of you wants to stop. The sense of camaraderie, the unspoken understanding that you are all in this together, can sometimes be the only thing that keeps you moving forward. It is the knowledge that you are not facing the cold alone, that your struggle is shared by your neighbors, that provides comfort in the midst of adversity. And yet, even amidst the solidarity, there are moments when the weight of the situation becomes too much. The pressure to keep up, to continue enduring, can be overwhelming. As the days go on and the food stores dwindle, the fear of scarcity becomes more pronounced. The thought of running out of provisions, of facing a winter with nothing left, creeps into your mind like a shadow. It is during these times that your resilience is tested the most. It is no longer just about physical endurance. It is about mental fortitude, about the ability to keep your spirit strong when every external force is trying to break you down. But just as the cold and hunger threaten to overwhelm you, there is a flicker of hope. The resilience you have built, the strength you have developed through countless winters, becomes the armor that shields you. The ability to endure hardship becomes not just a matter of survival, but a reflection of the human spirit's unwavering will to persevere. And it is in these moments, when the world seems to be at its darkest, that the light of resilience shines brightest. For those who have lived through many winters, the mental strain is something that becomes easier to handle over time. The older generations have learned to adapt, to weather the storms both outside and within. They know the importance of mental toughness, of holding on to hope even when everything else seems to be slipping away. Their strength becomes a source of guidance for the younger members of the village. teaching them not just how to survive physically, but how to endure emotionally and psychologically as well. The strength of the community also lies in the collective resilience of its people. As you go through the trials of winter, you realize that each person's ability to endure contributes to the survival of the whole. It is not just about individuals pushing through, but about the shared resolve to face each challenge together. The psychological resilience of the group becomes a force greater than the sum of its parts. Every person's determination, every act of kindness, every shared meal becomes part of a greater whole. It is this collective will to survive, to push through the hardships, that ultimately carries the village through the toughest of times. In the harshness of the winter, the villagers have learned to find strength in the most unlikely places. The quiet moments, the simple routines, and the shared experiences all become threads that bind the community together. Even as the cold cuts deep, as the hunger grows sharper, and as the days drag on, the spirit of endurance never falters. The villagers know that no matter how hard it gets, they will make it through. And in this unshakable belief in survival, they find the resilience to endure. Through the bitterest of winters, the human spirit endures steadfast, unbroken, and strong. In the cold, desolate winter months, life in a medieval village was not only about surviving the harsh weather and scarcity of food, but also about navigating a world full of unknown threats. The peasants, vulnerable to diseases, famine, and the unforgiving elements, found themselves seeking comfort in the mysterious and the supernatural, often turning to superstition to help them survive. Superstitions surrounding food and health were deeply embedded in everyday life, woven into the fabric of the village's survival tactics. The villagers, whose lives were bound to the rhythms of the seasons, knew that winter brought with it more than just cold. It brought illness, and illness often meant death. Plague, fever, and coughing illnesses swept through the village every year, sometimes with terrifying speed. When faced with such danger, the villagers' minds turned not only to practical remedies, but to the unseen forces that could influence their lives. For them, food and health were not separate, they were deeply intertwined. The idea that food could protect you from the invisible dangers of the world was not just a belief, it was a coping mechanism, a way of feeling in control of something they could not otherwise understand. Garlic, for example, was considered a powerful defense against evil spirits, disease, and even the plague itself. It was common practice to hang garlic cloves around the home, particularly near doorways and windows, where it was believed to ward off sickness. The pungent smell of garlic, strong enough to repel even the most persistent flies and pests, was thought to purify the air and cleanse the household of harmful spirits. This superstition was widespread, with villagers making garlic a staple not just in their kitchens, but in their everyday lives. It wasn't just the physical benefits of garlic that drew them to it. It was the belief that garlic was a guardian, a protector of health that worked silently but powerfully. Herbs, too, held a special place in the hearts of the medieval villagers. Herbs were believed to possess more than just culinary value. They were thought to be imbued with mystical properties that could heal, protect, and preserve. Rosemary, thyme, and sage were commonly grown in gardens and used in teas, soups, and medicinal concoctions. Thyme was believed to be particularly effective against the cold, and villagers often brewed it into a hot tea to soothe sore throats and clear chest congestion. The warmth of the herbal tea, combined with the belief in its healing power, created a sense of comfort and reassurance. It wasn't just the physical benefits that mattered. It was the feeling of security that the herbs provided in times of vulnerability. One particularly powerful belief was that certain foods could protect against the cold. The harsh winter temperatures made it necessary for peasants to rely on their diet not only for sustenance but for warmth. Foods such as hearty stews, rich in animal fats and root vegetables, were consumed to provide the body with enough energy to survive the cold. But it wasn't just about nourishment, it was about protection. Foods like beef, pork, and lamb were seen as providing the body with strength and resistance against the biting cold. There was a sense that by consuming these foods, the villagers were building an invisible shield that would fortify them against the frost and the winter illnesses that accompanied it. The belief in food as protection went beyond just physical health. It extended into the spiritual realm as well. Certain meals were believed to bring good fortune or to ward off bad spirits. For example, the act of eating a meal with others, especially during religious feasts or holidays, was thought to bring unity and prevent bad luck. It was a communal act, one that bound people together and created an aura of protection around the group. The sharing of food wasn't just about feeding the body, it was about nourishing the soul and ensuring that everyone in the community was safe from harm. Even when it came to bread, the most basic food of all, there were rituals attached to it. Some villagers believed that if bread was baked with care and served with love, it could protect the eater from hunger or disease. The bread was seen as a symbol of life itself, and the act of baking it was imbued with meaning. If bread was left out overnight or if it was burned, it was thought to invite bad spirits or misfortune into the home. So, in this harsh world, the bread was more than just food. It was a safeguard, a way to ensure that the home remained blessed and safe. The role of food as a form of protection was not limited to the physical world either. The medieval villagers also believed that certain foods could act as a shield against evil forces. For instance, when someone was ill or had suffered a misfortune, a special dish or meal might be prepared with specific ingredients meant to purify the body and spirit. These dishes, often shared in a communal setting, were thought to cleanse not only the body but also the aura or energy of the person in need of healing. At the same time, these superstitions provided a sense of order in an unpredictable and often harsh world. In the face of death, disease, and suffering, the belief in the protective power of food gave the villagers something to hold on to, something that might give them the strength to keep going. It gave them a sense of agency in a world where so much was beyond their control. If they ate the right foods, performed the right rituals, and followed the traditions passed down by their ancestors, they believed they could protect themselves from harm. And in a time when life was precarious, where every season brought new challenges, these beliefs provided comfort, no matter how irrational they might seem to modern minds. For the medieval peasants, food was not just sustenance. It was a symbol of their connection to the world around them, a connection to the land, the seasons, and the spiritual forces that governed their lives. Every meal, every herb, every ritual carried with it a deep sense of meaning. And while the dangers of the world were many and often invisible, food provided them with a sense of protection, a belief that they could face the challenges of the world with the strength that came from their beliefs in the power of food. It was a comfort, a shield, and a connection to a world far larger than themselves. This belief in food as protection wasn't just a superstition, it was a survival mechanism. In a world where death and disease were constant companions, the peasants clung to the idea that the food they consumed could offer them not just physical nourishment, but spiritual and emotional protection as well. By believing in these superstitions, they created a sense of security that helped them face the challenges of the medieval world. In this way, food wasn't merely a means to an end, it was a powerful tool in their struggle for survival, a way to feel in control in a world that was often out of their hands. In the end, the villagers' belief in the protective power of food was a reflection of their resilience. They found strength in these rituals, in the simple act of eating together, in the belief that the food they shared could protect them not only from the cold but from the unseen forces that threatened their lives. These superstitions, while born out of fear, also reflected the deep, abiding hope that food could do more than sustain them, it could save them. And in the harsh winters of medieval life, that hope was often all they had to keep them going. The harshness of life during a medieval winter was felt in every corner of the village, from the moment the first chill of the season seeped in until the slow warmth of spring finally began to break the frost's grip. In these long, cold months, survival was never guaranteed. The elements, combined with the scarcity of resources and the frailty of human health, created an unrelenting struggle. The cold was perhaps the most constant adversary, one that could never be ignored. It didn't just bite, it tore at the very fabric of life. Every crack in the walls, every draft that swept through the open spaces of a house was a reminder of the battle that the villagers fought daily to preserve warmth. Homes were typically made of stone or wood, and though they offered some shelter, they were ill-equipped to keep the winter at bay. Even the wealthier homes, with their grand fireplaces, struggled to stay warm. Many houses, particularly those of peasants, were poorly insulated. There were no such things as double-glazed windows, nor could they afford any other methods of insulation to stave off the cold. As the temperature dropped, the cold would seep into the very bones of the villagers, often making every moment feel as if it were spent in a battle against an invisible force. The firewood, although carefully stockpiled in the fall, quickly dwindled, and with it went the heat that was so desperately needed. The dampness of winter made the cold even more unbearable. Walls that were already thin and full of cracks would let in the biting wind, and the air inside the house became just as bitter and unwelcoming as the outdoors. The villagers would try to close up the gaps with scraps of cloth or hay, but the effort was rarely enough to keep out the chill. In an era when warmth was an ongoing struggle, every action was dictated by the need to stay warm. The villagers would spend most of their days huddled around the fire, a small flame offering temporary relief from the oppressive cold. The fire, though a welcome source of light and heat, was far from reliable. It required constant attention, requiring people to keep it stoked with wood, and it often needed to be watched carefully to avoid accidental fires. It was not uncommon for the fire to burn out at night, leaving the villagers to endure the bitter cold in silence, their breaths visible in the freezing air. But it wasn't just about staying warm. The cold itself was a cause of constant illness. Exposure to the elements, particularly during the night, contributed heavily to chronic ailments. The lack of adequate nutrition, especially during the winter months, only exacerbated the issue. The villagers could not afford to eat fresh foods, and so their diets became reliant on the food preserved during the warmer months: dried meats, salted fish, and stale bread. While these were necessary for survival, they lacked the nutrients needed to keep the body strong against the persistent cold. The immune systems of the villagers were weakened by the poor diet and the cold, making them vulnerable to illness. Influenza, pneumonia, and other respiratory illnesses spread rapidly in such conditions. In many cases, these conditions were fatal, particularly for the elderly, the very young, and the weak. But even those who survived these illnesses were often left with lasting effects: weak lungs, chronic coughs, and difficulty breathing. Such ailments were a constant part of life, and the villagers were often forced to simply endure, for there was little medical help available to them. The closest they could come to relief was the occasional herbal remedy or poultice, concocted by a village healer who was just as likely to be a layperson as a trained professional. Beyond the chronic illnesses, the physical toll of the cold also took its toll on the joints. The cold, combined with the lack of proper nutrition and exercise, led to aching bones and stiff muscles. For the older villagers, arthritis and rheumatism became constant companions, making simple tasks like getting out of bed in the morning an arduous chore. Even the younger villagers were not immune to the cold's effects. The constant shivering, the aching limbs from lack of movement, and the weight of heavy clothing made the cold not just uncomfortable, but painful. Moreover, the harsh reality of winter did not just affect physical health. It also took a psychological toll. The villagers, particularly those in rural areas, were isolated from the larger world. During the winter months, this isolation was compounded by the inaccessibility of the roads, which were often buried under snow or made impassable by ice. The lack of connection to the outside world led to feelings of loneliness and despair. The villagers relied on each other to stay strong. But even the warmth of community could not always stave off the mental toll of winter. The seasonal hardships weighed heavily on the villagers' spirits, and there were days when the sheer exhaustion of surviving winter became too much to bear. The long nights seemed endless. The absence of sunlight had a profound effect on the human psyche, leaving many feeling weary, sad, and fatigued. The constant need to fight the elements created an atmosphere of tension and strain that was difficult to shake. And yet, despite all of this, the villagers persisted. Resilience, in the face of constant struggle, was a trait that defined the medieval peasants. They relied on the routines of daily life to see them through. The familiar rhythms of work tending the fire, chopping wood, caring for the animals, and preparing food became anchors in a world that was unpredictable and harsh. The sense of community, the unspoken bond between neighbors, was crucial to survival. Even in the face of illness, injury, and death, the villagers would carry on. They knew that there was no other choice. The brutality of winter did not grant them the luxury of surrender. The struggle for survival was a way of life, and they had learned to accept it. Their mental resilience was as important as their physical strength. For if they did not endure, if they did not keep moving forward, they would not survive. So as the villagers worked through the cold, aching days of winter, they relied on the strength of each other. Their ability to endure the grueling months was a testament to their fortitude. Despite the physical suffering, despite the constant threat of disease, despite the loneliness and the isolation, they found a way to survive. The hardships of winter were but a part of the cycle of life. And in the end, survival depended not just on the physical strength of the body, but on the unbreakable spirit of those who called the village home. They had weathered the storms before, and they would weather them again. And in that, they found hope. In the heart of winter, when the biting cold winds howled across the land and snow covered the earth in a thick blanket of white, the villagers of medieval times faced an unyielding challenge. They were bound by the relentless cycle of nature, where survival demanded not only resilience but also labor. The harshest of the seasons, winter was a time of scarcity and difficulty. Yet it was also a time when the daily work of the villagers became even more crucial to their survival. Even as the temperature dropped, the work continued, and the determination to push through the cold kept the village alive. In the medieval world, no one could afford to simply rest during the winter. Work continued, despite the relentless weather. The village blacksmith, an essential figure in this small community, worked through the coldest days. In his small workshop, the heat from the forge became a life-saving refuge, where the constant hammering of metal rang out. The blacksmith's work was essential. He forged tools and equipment for the village, repaired weapons, and provided essential services to those who needed their plows, horseshoes, and knives sharpened. But even in his workshop, there were limitations. Wood could become too damp to burn properly. Metal could become brittle with the cold. And the forge's fire, while warm, was never enough to heat the whole workshop. The blacksmith's day was dictated by necessity. He worked early in the morning, often while the light was dim, to take advantage of the short daylight hours. The rest of the time, he would retreat into the warmth of his hearth, drawing comfort from the heat as the winter chill crept into every corner of his workshop. Despite these challenges, his work was vital. His strength and determination were key to keeping the community functioning. The blacksmith's labor was a symbol of the kind of work ethic that sustained the village, a tireless pursuit to ensure that the tools of survival were always ready. The farmers, too, had a difficult job during the winter. While their fields were covered in snow and unable to yield new crops, the work they had done in the warmer months did not stop with the fall harvest. For the village's farmers, winter was a time for upkeep, a time to prepare for the next growing season. They spent hours mending fences and equipment, ensuring that the tools of the trade were ready when the snow melted and the earth could be worked again. Cows, goats, and sheep still needed tending, and while their numbers were fewer during the winter months, the chores associated with their care continued. Farmers would feed and care for their livestock in stables that were cold but necessary for survival, ensuring the animals were warm enough to survive the harsh winter and that they continued to produce milk or meat when needed was part of the delicate balancing act that rural life demanded. Even the work of the animals themselves was affected by the cold. The horses, oxen, and cows were slower and less energetic in the freezing temperatures, requiring the farmers to be extra careful in their treatment. Craftsmen and builders, who had toiled throughout the year, also found themselves struggling through winter. The longer nights and shorter days meant that daylight hours were precious, and each task had to be carefully planned. The cold made it harder to work with some materials. Wood and stone, essential building supplies, often became brittle or difficult to manage, requiring greater patience. Stoneworkers would often retreat indoors at the first sign of snow, leaving the cold to dominate the world outside. But even as work slowed, the need to continue preparing for the next cycle of life in the village remained. There was always work to be done, whether it was weaving, repairing tools, or creating goods that would be essential for survival. Winter days in a medieval village were short, and the daylight hours, often no more than 6 or 7, meant that villagers had to adapt to the rhythm of the seasons. They worked during the daylight, maximizing the precious hours they had before the sun disappeared behind the horizon. As the sun set and the darkness crept in, villagers retreated to their homes, seeking shelter from the biting cold. It wasn't simply a matter of staying warm. It was about ensuring that every hour of daylight was put to use for the tasks that were necessary to survive the winter months. The villagers adapted their work schedules to the changing seasons, knowing that the winter months would demand more careful planning. The early evening, when the darkness arrived, was reserved for rest and recuperation. The light from a fire in the hearth provided warmth, but it also signaled the end of the working day. This quiet, reflective time was often spent with family, recounting stories, planning for the future, or simply finding comfort in each other's company. There was no electricity, no artificial lighting to prolong the workday. Instead, villagers embraced the natural rhythms of the seasons and lived in harmony with the darkness of winter. However, even the break from physical labor did not mean complete rest. Throughout the winter, villagers took the opportunity to engage in domestic tasks, spinning wool, knitting, mending clothing, and preparing for the next season's crops. Women in particular spent hours knitting and sewing, using the evenings to prepare garments for the coming months. Many would weave new fabrics or mend old clothes that had become worn through the hard work of the year. Despite the cold, it was not a time for true rest. The work was never truly finished, as survival demanded constant preparation and vigilance. While the daytime was for labor, the evening was for reflection. This was when villagers gathered around the fire in their homes, a comforting presence that provided both warmth and light. In the flickering shadows, families told stories, passed down traditions, and found solace in their shared history. The hearth served as the heart of the home, bringing light to the darkness outside, and offering a reminder that, despite the relentless cold, there was a sense of belonging and warmth within the community. Despite the pressure to complete work in the short hours of daylight, there was a deep sense of solidarity that connected the people. The work was not just about individual survival, it was about the survival of the village as a whole. People worked together, shared resources, and adapted to the conditions. Whether it was lending a hand to repair a fence, helping to bring in firewood, or simply sharing a meal, The people of the village leaned on each other to face the hardships of winter. They understood that each of them was integral to the survival of the whole community, and they performed their tasks not just out of necessity, but out of a shared commitment to their collective well-being. As the winter days passed, the villagers knew that the cold would not relent until spring arrived. Their lives were bound by a constant cycle of labor and survival, dictated by the rhythms of the land and the seasons. For the peasants, there was little room for indulgence or leisure. Every hour spent working was an hour earned in the fight for survival, and it was a fight that they took seriously. No matter how difficult the winter, there was a sense of pride in the work they did. They survived not because of luxury or comfort, but because of their grit, their adaptability, and their unbreakable bond with each other. Winter, with its cold and darkness, was an ever-present reminder of the precariousness of life. Yet, in the face of it, the villagers stood resilient, united in their determination to survive the harshest of seasons. The work never stopped, and neither did their spirits. The winter market was more than just a place to buy and sell. It was the beating heart of the medieval village's survival, a fragile yet enduring lifeline that kept the community connected even in the depths of scarcity. For peasants, who lived from harvest to harvest, the arrival of winter transformed every grain of barley, every strip of salted meat, and every thread of wool into a matter of life and death. The fields were barren, the rivers frozen, and the forests silent under heavy snow. Yet, amidst that stillness, there was one place that never truly slept: the market square, where the barter system thrived like a quiet miracle. Money, as most peasants knew, was a luxury few ever saw. Coins were rare, and when they appeared, they were often hoarded or passed through the hands of merchants, clergy, or lords, rather than those who worked the land. For the villagers, trade was not measured in gold or silver, it was measured in necessity. You gave what you could spare to gain what you desperately needed. A sack of grain might buy a pair of sturdy boots. A cured ham could be exchanged for a bundle of firewood. A carefully woven blanket might be traded for a jug of ale or a small wheel of cheese. Every exchange was personal, face to face, sealed not with contracts or signatures, but with a nod, a handshake, and mutual understanding. On market days, the village that had seemed so quiet through the long, cold nights would awaken to life. Smoke rose from cooking fires as people gathered, bundled in thick cloaks and scarves, their breath visible in the icy air. The chatter of trade filled the square, voices calling out, laughter mixing with the sound of hooves and the bark of dogs. The market was a place of survival, yes, but it was also a place of community, where news was shared, friendships renewed, and small hopes rekindled amid the harsh realities of winter. For a moment, the monotony of the cold season was broken by the lively hum of human interaction. For the peasant, bartering was an art. It required not only a sharp sense of value, but also tact and patience. What one man considered worthless might be another's treasure. A broken iron plow could be repaired and made useful again. Old clothes could be patched into new garments. Even scraps of wool or bone might find a second life in the hands of a skilled craftsman. Nothing was truly wasted in the village economy. Necessity turned every item into potential currency. This resourcefulness wasn't just a habit, it was a way of thinking, a survival instinct passed down through generations. The peasants learned to see beyond the immediate worth of an object, to measure its potential for use or trade in ways that money could never replicate. In the bitter cold months when crops no longer grew and the livestock huddled close in their pens, the barter system became more essential than ever. Food stores, no matter how carefully preserved, always seemed to run low by midwinter. Salted fish might start to taste bitter, dried peas might begin to mold, and bread could become stale or infested with pests. That was when villagers turned to each other, bringing what little they had left to trade. A woman with extra onions might exchange them for a neighbor's pot of honey. A farmer with spare straw could swap it for a few logs of firewood. These exchanges were born not just of need, but of trust. Each person knew that one day they too might depend on another's generosity. Trust, however, was not a given. In desperate times, when hunger pressed hard and supplies dwindled, trade could become tense. There were moments when suspicion hung in the air like the frost itself, each villager measuring not only the worth of goods, but the honesty of the one offering them. A good reputation became as valuable as any commodity. A man known for fair dealing could find help when times were tough, while one who cheated his neighbors risked being shunned. Fair trade was not just moral, it was survival. In the small, closed world of the medieval village, one's word was everything. To break trust was to risk isolation, and isolation in winter could mean death. The market was not just for peasants, of course. Merchants occasionally arrived from nearby towns, bringing with them goods that seemed almost magical to those who worked the land. A jar of foreign spices, a bolt of dyed fabric, or a small piece of metalwork could light up the faces of villagers who had known only the rough textures of their simple lives. Yet these luxuries were out of reach for most. Still, their presence reminded everyone that there was a wider world beyond the snow-covered fields, a world of possibility, even if it remained distant and untouchable. For most villagers, the market was more about the essentials: salt, flour, tools, firewood, and occasionally a small comfort, a candle, a pinch of sugar, or a scrap of fine cloth to mend a coat. Every item carried with it the invisible weight of labor. When you traded, you weren't just exchanging objects, you were trading the time and effort it took to make or grow them. A woven basket represented hours of work in the cold, twisting reeds with stiff, frozen fingers. A jug of ale was the product of careful brewing, using grains that could have been eaten instead. Each trade was an act of sacrifice, a delicate balance between giving up something necessary and gaining something equally vital. The barter system also created a network of interdependence that kept the village alive. The miller relied on the farmer for grain. The farmer relied on the blacksmith for tools. The blacksmith relied on the carpenter for wood. Everyone's labor was woven together into a fragile yet resilient web of exchange. Even the poorest members of society found ways to participate, gathering herbs, mending clothes, or offering labor in exchange for food. This interwoven economy ensured that no one was completely left behind, though many still teetered on the edge of hunger and hardship. In this world, resourcefulness became a form of wisdom. To survive a medieval winter meant knowing how to stretch what little you had. Clothes were mended and remended until they were more patch than fabric. Tools were repaired again and again rather than replaced. Bones from a slaughtered animal became needles, combs, or handles for knives. Ash from the hearth was mixed with animal fat to make soap. Even the scraps from the table, the bits of stale bread, the bones, and the vegetable peelings were turned into stews or fed to the pigs. Nothing was wasted, because everything had value when life itself depended on making do. This way of life instilled a deep sense of gratitude and humility. Every loaf of bread, every jug of ale, every handful of beans was the result of countless hours of labor and trade. To waste anything was to disrespect the invisible chain of effort that connected one person's work to another's survival. Even in the face of exhaustion, the peasants understood the quiet dignity of their toil and the necessity of their cooperation. Winter, with all its hardship, revealed the strength of this system. The market wasn't just a place, it was a symbol of humanity's ability to adapt and endure. The villagers, through their bartering and resourcefulness, proved that survival wasn't about wealth or luxury. It was about community. It was about finding value in the ordinary, strength in cooperation, and resilience in the face of scarcity. Every trade made, every small kindness offered, carried within it the hope of another day survived, another winter conquered. As the snow slowly began to thaw and the first signs of spring crept across the land, the villagers would look back on the long months of winter with a kind of quiet pride. They had endured not through wealth or ease, but through ingenuity, trust, and the simple strength of helping one another. The market, once filled with the desperate bargaining of survival, would soon echo with laughter and relief. But deep down, each villager knew that the cycle would begin again. When the next winter came, they would once more gather in the market square, bartering not just goods but hope, endurance, and the shared understanding that survival was always a collective effort. The long, bleak winter months in a medieval village were not just a test of survival, they were a time that demanded not only physical endurance, but emotional and spiritual resilience. And the harsh cold and isolation could easily lead to despair. But it was during these long stretches of darkness that the villagers turned to rituals, traditions, and the comfort of shared community to help them endure. Rituals, both religious and folk in nature, served as a crucial part of the peasant experience, providing both structure and emotional nourishment in an otherwise difficult time. The winter solstice, the longest and darkest day of the year, held great significance in the medieval world. It marked not just a seasonal shift, but a symbolic turning point. For the peasants, this day was a reminder that the cold, hard days of winter would eventually give way to the warmth and renewal of spring. Religious holidays like Christmas and the feasts that accompanied them, while rooted in faith, also served as a much-needed reprieve from the everyday grind of survival. These moments of communal celebration were often the highlight of the season, a time to pause, eat, and share in the warmth of human connection. Christmas, in particular, was a time for the community to come together and celebrate the birth of Christ. But it was also a time to revel in the few luxuries that winter allowed. The Christmas feast, often a rare occasion for indulgence, brought together peasants, farmers, and even the lowliest of servants for a meal that featured salted meats, roasted vegetables, ale, and bread, all washed down with mulled wine. It was a rare moment where the harshness of the season seemed to lift, if only briefly, and the village could taste the sweetness of life beyond the fields, beyond the toil, beyond the frozen ground. The food was more than just sustenance. It was a reminder of community, of survival, and of hope. But it wasn't just the religious holidays that marked the calendar. There were also the folk traditions that kept spirits high and connected the people to the seasons. One of the most beloved was the lighting of the Yule log, a tradition that predated Christianity but became integrated into medieval Christian celebrations. The Yule log was a large, specially chosen piece of wood that would be dragged into the hearth and set alight, often with great ceremony. The villagers would gather around, sometimes singing songs or offering prayers for good health and a prosperous year. The fire would burn for days, and its light would offer warmth and a symbolic victory over the long nights of winter. Even as the days grew longer, the fire from the Yule log carried with it the ancient, primal force of light, pushing back against the darkness, not only of winter but of human suffering and hardship. These rituals weren't just about marking time or following tradition. They were about reinforcing the sense of community that was crucial for survival. In the village, rituals and communal meals were the bedrock upon which relationships were built and maintained. These rituals allowed the people to bond, to share in joy, and to collectively bear the burdens of the long winter. There was comfort in the familiar patterns of life, and knowing that these rituals would be repeated year after year gave people a sense of stability, even in the harshest of conditions. Even in the absence of grand feasts or the comforts of modern life, storytelling was another ritual that played an integral role in the survival of the human spirit during the winter. When the darkness seemed endless, when the cold bit through to the bones, when hunger gnawed at the edges of your thoughts, the fireside stories could provide a much-needed escape. The hearth was the gathering place, the emotional center of the home. As families sat around the fire, they would share stories, passed down through generations, full of legends, lessons, and humor. The stories varied from village to village, but they all served a common purpose: to instill a sense of history, pride, and identity. They told of ancestors, of heroes who fought through adversity, of saints who had endured trials, of the earth's bounty and the season's changes. They connected the present with the past, the villagers to their forebears, and to each other. These stories also provided a sense of continuity, a reminder that, despite the hardships of the present, the village had weathered storms before and would continue to survive. One of the most common types of stories told in the winter months was that of the great feasts of the past, of harvests so bountiful that they could feed the entire village for months, of family members returning from far lands to celebrate, and of the joy that came with the seasonal celebrations. But not all stories were light-hearted. Many dealt with the harsh realities of life, the struggles of famine, pestilence, and war, and how these hardships had been endured. These darker stories, though they could be unsettling, reminded the villagers of the resilience within them, and they served as warnings and lessons for the future. Through these stories, they learned what to do in times of crisis, how to preserve food, how to treat sickness, and, perhaps most importantly, how to care for one another. As the evening wore on and the fire burned low, the tales would continue, becoming more fantastical or increasingly solemn as the night deepened. It was during these long nights that the villagers found a kind of solace. They found comfort in knowing they weren't alone. Each person's suffering and triumph were part of the larger collective experience of survival. The stories helped them endure the unbearable cold and the harshness of winter, creating an emotional tapestry that bound them together as a community. In addition to these spoken traditions, the villagers also engaged in shared rituals that reinforced the importance of their interconnectedness. One such practice was the communal singing of carols or hymns during the long nights, a way to lift spirits and reinforce their collective identity. Music was a powerful force in medieval times, and its ability to bring people together in song helped provide the villagers with a sense of solidarity and purpose. The shared act of singing, of joining voices together in unity, gave strength to the people, even as the bitter winds howled outside. Even the children played their part in these rituals. When the cold winter nights seemed endless and the young ones grew restless, parents would tell them stories of magical beings, such as the mischievous elves or the benevolent saint who gave gifts. These stories, though often light-hearted and whimsical, helped keep the children entertained and connected them to the traditions of their ancestors. It was a form of education, too, teaching the young about the values and customs of their people, while providing them with a break from the bleakness of the season. The power of these rituals and stories should not be underestimated. They were not just a form of entertainment or escape. They were the glue that held the community together. They were how the villagers maintained their mental and emotional health during the darkest months. Without these rituals, the isolation and hardships of winter would have been far more unbearable. These traditions fostered resilience, an essential quality for surviving the medieval winters. As the winter months dragged on, the villagers would find comfort not in the promises of spring or the hope of a new season, but in the continuity of these rituals. The days may have been short and the nights long, but through the telling of stories, the lighting of fires, and the communal sharing of food and warmth, the villagers found a way to endure. They found meaning in the small, repeated acts that connected them to their ancestors, to each other, and to the land that sustained them. In a world where food was scarce, the cold unrelenting, and the future uncertain, the rituals of winter were the threads that held the community together. They were more than just habits. They were the emotional lifeline that allowed the villagers to navigate the harshest months of the year. These traditions, passed down from generation to generation, helped the peasants endure the winter and emerge stronger, ready to face the challenges of the next year. In this way, winter was not just a time of survival. It was a time of spiritual renewal, emotional bonding, and cultural preservation. Through rituals, storytelling, and the strength of community, the villagers found ways to conquer the darkness of winter, not by fighting it, but by embracing it as a shared experience. Surviving the medieval winter was a challenge that required more than just physical endurance. It demanded hope, faith, and the strength to endure. While the biting cold and scarce resources could easily break the spirit, the villagers knew that every winter came with an eventual promise: the arrival of spring. For the peasants, winter wasn't just a season of hardship, it was a time that tested their resolve and resilience, a reminder of both the fragility and the strength of life. And in the face of adversity, hope and the legacy of survival remained constants that guided them through the coldest, darkest months. Despite the constant pressures of harsh weather, limited food supplies, and the constant threat of illness, the villagers carried on, day by day. The bleakness of winter, with its frozen landscapes and long nights, often felt like it would never end. But even in the most difficult times, the rhythm of life persisted. The work never stopped. The homes, though cold, were full of the hum of daily chores, food preparation, fire building, and community gathering. The spirit of survival was tied to the knowledge that winter was not eternal, that the earth, though dormant, would one day wake. Hope for a better season was not just wishful thinking, it was a deeply ingrained part of the peasant mentality. The rhythm of life in the village was shaped by the seasons, and each new season brought with it an opportunity to start again. The spring harvest was the most anticipated event of the year, a time when the land would once again yield its bounty. This promise of renewal was a powerful motivator, giving the peasants the strength to push through the hardest months. They didn't just survive the winter they endured with the understanding that life was cyclical, that after every fallow period, new growth would emerge. It was this cyclical nature of life, the passing of the seasons, that gave the villagers hope. In the dead of winter, as they huddled around fires and shared meals, there was always the quiet belief that this season too would pass. And with the changing of the season came the arrival of new crops, a promise of food security, and the chance to replenish what had been consumed. For the peasants, this annual renewal was not just a physical change, it was a deeply spiritual and emotional one. It symbolized the strength of life itself, the perseverance of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Yet, survival was not only about food and warmth, it was about community. The villagers relied heavily on each other to endure the harshest times. This sense of interdependence was deeply rooted in the medieval way of life. In a time before modern technology and infrastructure, the success of one was the success of all. A neighbor's hardship was shared, and a neighbor's triumph was celebrated. It wasn't just a community of people living next to one another, it was a community of people living for one another. When the days grew shorter and food became scarcer, the communal spirit of the village was more vital than ever. Shared meals, collective efforts, and the strength of relationships held the fabric of the community together. Whether it was through the pooling of food, the sharing of firewood, or the collective effort to tend to the crops, villagers worked as one to survive. This communal approach to survival meant that, even when individual families were struggling, they could find solace in knowing they weren't alone. The strength of the community helped carry each person through. But it wasn't just the physical presence of others that made survival possible, it was the spiritual and emotional support that the community offered. In the midst of the long, dark winter, villagers would gather for storytelling, religious observances, and seasonal celebrations. These rituals, rooted in faith and tradition, provided the mental and emotional fortitude needed to endure the cold and hardship. The warmth of community gatherings, the comfort of shared stories, and the emotional bond that came from collective experiences all helped to lift the spirits of the villagers. In the face of the physical demands of survival, the psychological toll could be just as heavy. The isolation of winter, the uncertainty of food supplies, and the constant vigilance required to stay warm and healthy often led to stress, anxiety, and despair. Yet time and time again, the peasants demonstrated resilience in the face of these hardships. Through their unwavering belief in the cycles of nature, in the power of community, and in the strength of their faith, they found the will to carry on. It was this resilience that became a defining characteristic of medieval life. The peasants' ability to persevere, even when the world around them seemed harsh and unforgiving, became a testament to the strength of the human spirit. Every year, despite the overwhelming odds, they would rise again. The fields would be plowed, the crops would be sown, and the village would be filled with life once more. The knowledge that they had survived another winter, that they had endured, brought a sense of accomplishment and pride. This resilience, however, was not just about surviving for survival's sake. It was about living with a sense of purpose, of making the most of the difficult times, and finding meaning even in hardship. The villagers' connection to the earth, to the seasons, and to one another was a powerful force. It was what allowed them to endure not just the physical hardships of winter, but the emotional and psychological weight of it as well. As the season changed, the villagers were not just celebrating the arrival of spring, they were celebrating the power of life itself. Each new shoot, each new bloom, each new harvest was a reminder that they had survived. The resilience they had shown during the winter was rewarded with the promise of new life, new growth, and a new beginning. And in that cycle of survival and renewal, the villagers found not just hope, but a deeper sense of connection to the world around them. In the end, the legacy of the medieval peasants was one of resilience, hope, and strength. Through their endurance, they not only survived the harsh winters, they thrived in the face of adversity. And as the seasons passed, they passed on the knowledge of survival, the stories of endurance, and the spirit of resilience to future generations. The lessons of the past of strength in the face of hardship, of community, and of hope continued to shape the lives of those who came after them. As we reflect on the medieval experience of winter survival, we can see the power of resilience that runs through human history. It is a reminder that, no matter how bleak the season or how harsh the conditions, there is always the possibility of renewal, of new beginnings, and of hope. And perhaps, in our own lives, we can draw strength from the resilience of those who came before us, remembering that even in the darkest of winters, there is always the promise of spring. As you reflect on the lives of medieval villagers, the hardship they faced during the brutal winter months becomes more than just a tale of struggle, it's a testament to their resilience. Life was not easy in the village, where the cold crept into homes, the food was scarce, and survival was a constant battle. Yet, despite the overwhelming challenges, these villagers endured. They had no choice but to carry on, relying on their community, resourcefulness, and faith to guide them through the harshest of times. The warmth of their fires, the shared meals, and the solidarity that bound them together were the foundation of their survival. They found ways to make do, to persevere, and to adapt, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. In many ways, the very spirit of survival in the medieval winter village was rooted in a deep sense of collective strength. Neighbors helped one another, families pulled together, and the sense of interdependence became a vital source of hope. In the darkest and coldest of days, it was this bond, the connection between individuals and the shared experience of hardship, that allowed people to push through. It wasn't just the food on their tables or the warmth from their hearths that kept them going. It was their unwavering belief that they were not alone, This collective spirit made the seemingly impossible task of surviving the winter months a little more bearable. Fast forward to the present day, and much of what was once essential for survival is now taken for granted. The comforts of modern life, access to food at any time, central heating in every home, the security of proper sanitation are luxuries that medieval villagers could never have imagined. Today, we have the technology, systems, and infrastructure to make our lives easier and safer, without the daily worry of where our next meal will come from or how we'll keep warm at night. We can reach into our cupboards, find shelves stocked with food, and flick a switch for instant warmth. Our modern homes, with their central heating and insulation, are a far cry from the drafty medieval dwellings that provided little respite from the cold. We live in a world where, for the most part, survival is no longer something we have to actively fight for. Yet, despite the abundance and security we enjoy today, there are lessons to be learned from the past. The medieval villagers taught us not just about physical endurance, but also about the strength of the human spirit. They endured with what they had, made do with little, and faced each hardship with an unwavering commitment to their community and their survival. Today, we may not face the same immediate threats of hunger or the cold, but we still face struggles, personal, emotional, or societal, that require the same resilience and perseverance. The lessons of endurance, community, and hope remain just as relevant as ever. Reflecting on the medieval winter village life reminds us to value the comforts we often take for granted. It serves as a reminder to appreciate the resources we have, the warmth of our homes, the abundance of food, and the safety we enjoy. We may never fully experience the hardships of the past, but we can learn from the resilience of those who lived through them. The next time you sit down to a warm meal or cozy up in your home, remember the peasants of the medieval winter village whose endurance, solidarity, and spirit carried them through the harshest of seasons. The life they lived, full of hardship and beauty, should inspire us to never take our blessings for granted and always to appreciate the strength within us, just as they did.